Hello and welcome to Transfermarkt TV. I'm Manu Feth, he's Stefan Bienkowski, and today's big topic is, of course, the league Transfermarkt market value update, and one player in particular is Neymar, who's now dropped to 60 million euros. And I want to just read a quote here from our market value area manager in France, Ronald Carafe. Neymar started with great numbers and was directly involved in 35 goals in his first 29 games before an injury ended his season in mid-February. At 31, he's not as interesting to cash-rich clubs as he was a few years ago. That's becoming more and more noticeable in terms of his market value. That's from Carafe, of course. A great guy in France, Stefan. I think it's a pretty good assessment of the player. Obviously, he knows the market there really well. But when you look at Neymar in terms of outside of France, I think there isn't really many big European teams interested in him anymore.
Yeah, I feel like Neymar's maybe a kind of cautionary tale for the top end of European football as to what can happen when you get everything you want to an extent. You know, obviously his move to PSG was meant to kind of define his career, meant to define his legacy as, you know, potentially one of the best players of his generation. And one way or another, it just hasn't really worked out the way we wanted to. I think this season's actually probably a good microcosm of his time at PSG as a whole, in the sense that, you know, you look at his numbers and they're tremendous. He's got 18 goals and 17 assists in 29 games. And I mean, those are like Lionel Messi numbers at the best point of his career. But if you kind of break it down in terms of where those goals came from, who they were scored against, and it goes some way to kind of explaining why Neymar's a perfectly good player 8/10 of the way, but when you really need him in those kind of crunch games, over the last couple of seasons, he hasn't really quite worked out for PSG. He's ended up being a bit of a liability, to be perfectly honest with you. You know, the really interesting thing that I noticed was that kind of narrowed down to his Champions League performances. He's only scored 2 goals in his last 12 games in the competition, hasn't scored a goal in a knockout round of the Champions League since March 2020, when PSG surpassed Borussia Dortmund. And, you know, of course, PSG have reached a final. He played a part in that as well. So it's not like he's done nothing, but he was brought to the club to win the Champions League. And through one reason or another, it hasn't happened. And as Roland pointed out there, in terms of a large chunk of the season being missed through injury, if you look at his last 3 seasons at PSG, he's missed 57 games. You know, and that can maybe work out to maybe about 1/3 maybe of the total matches. It's an issue that's dogged Neymar. It's something that's kind of dogged his reputation as well. When you see these reports about he always seems to get injured around the time of his sister's birthday, and then you see him in tabloid magazines in Brazil celebrating and things, you know. And that's obviously an aspect of his life. And look, if that's his prerogative and football's not the most important thing to him, then fair enough. But that's obviously a large part of it. And I think that's why, as Ronan says, he's not quite the desirable big star player that he once was, and why, with a contract until 2025, I believe, he's potentially not exactly going to get another big move.
No, I mean, that is the really important question here. What's going to happen next, right? I mean, he has been heavily linked with a move to Saudi Al Hilal. It's been the club there. It seems like that the Saudi Pro League is bailing out all these big European clubs out of their contracts that they want to get rid of, which is probably a topic for another show. But also, and I thought this was really interesting, is Neymar recently has spent a lot of time in Miami, right around the time that Lionel Messi was announced there, and he's gone on record saying that Lionel Messi is going to love living in Miami. He's going to love the lifestyle there. He's going to love playing in MLS. Obviously, Miami is a very Brazilian city. You know, the club Inter Miami is actually named after Internacional, the team in Grêmio in Porto Alegre, and not the team in Italy. So not a lot of people know this, but it's because of the huge Brazilian influence in that city. So, you know, that raised a lot of eyebrows and makes a lot of people wondering, could Neymar be reunited with Lionel Messi in MLS and perhaps even in Miami? Of course, they would have to move a few contracts to make this happen. But, you know, seeing Messi at the NBA finals where, you know, the Miami Heat were involved, then you kind of wonder, like, could Inter Miami bail out PSG and take that contract off their hands? I don't think it's impossible, Stefan.
Yeah, I mean, this is a really interesting thing about Neymar at this point in his career. Of course, he's now over 30 years old, and on Transfermarkt, that does mean your market value begins to tick down, but you would suspect he still has a number of years left in him at the top level. You know, we saw Ronaldo go well into his mid-30s before he left Europe. Lionel Messi, I believe, 35, 36 before he'll start kicking the ball for Inter Miami. At 31, Neymar still has plenty of kind of life left in him to play at the top level in Europe, and it'll be interesting to see how he looks at the situation around him at PSG and makes up his mind, you know, because on the one hand, you've got Messi leaving this summer, Kylian Mbappe is almost certain to leave next summer, and all of a sudden that kind of team that were put together to try and win a Champions League has been broken down. And Neymar can look at that one of two ways. He can either say, well, my friends are leaving, the best players are leaving, I'm not going to be the last guy out of this place to kind of turn off the lights, I'm going to make my way out of here too. Or he could turn around and say, look, Mbappe and Messi have stole the limelight from me for the last 2 or 3 seasons. Now it's time for PSG to be the Neymar club or the Neymar team, you know, and that might finally see him kind of projected into the spotlight as the undisputed number one player of that team, the undisputed star player, which is obviously something he's always reveled in, whether it's, you know, going back to time in Brazil or Barcelona, and of course what he expected when he moved to PSG in the first place. So it's well up in the air. Still, you know, he's got so much time left in his contract. I'd be very surprised if PSG were happy to sell him as well as losing Mbappe and Messi, but you never know. I guess it comes down to what Neymar wants between now and the end of his career.
You have to remember that they lit up the Eiffel Tower for the Neymar announcement because he was that big transfer, right? He was the one that was supposed to put PSG on the world stage, and we still waiting for that. And as you said, maybe the opportunity is because other players are leaving now. For that to happen, I think he has to actually stay healthy through a spring for once in his career. He hasn't really done that yet. It's an interesting one. I think it's an interesting one that we need to keep an eye on. Of course, you can keep an eye on it in our rumor mill. Follow all the latest updates on Transfermarkt, and let's see what happens to Neymar's career. A player that, despite all the trophies he's won, still looks to fulfill his potential entirely. But we'll be back soon with more content. Until then, cheers and bye-bye.